Okay, welcome to Wealthy Living Podcast. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. It is here that I connect with a variety of wonderful humans to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected, and well life. A place to learn and grow in confidence and clarity and make choices that support your well-being, both personally and professionally. So my guest today, she's a self-confessed lazy introvert, a Hay House author, and an unbusy mother of 3. She owns a rose farm as a hobby and lives by the beach in sunny Australia. Now, how good does that sound? So today we're going to discuss ways to create a successful business without the constant hustle, and the challenges to do this, and some changes that you can make to make it feel less overwhelming and more joy in your business and still be able to make money, and what the possible outcomes of this can lead to. So to have this conversation, I'd like to welcome best-selling author of books Lucky Bitch, Get Rich, Lucky Bitch and Chillpreneur, Denise Duffield-Thomas on the show. So welcome, Denise.
Hi, how are you? Now, we remember we were going to do this in Fiji together.
I know.
And we did too much chilling on the beach with hammocks to get around to it. So I'm glad that we can do it now on Zoom instead.
I know. It's not as pretty, is it? But it's not as chilled, I suppose, but let's hope that just the personalities that we are will bring some chill to it anyway. But yeah, definitely. God, oh my God, take me back to Fiji today.
I know, it was lovely. And I'm glad we're talking about sustainable success, because something really came up for me at that conference, because I used to be someone who went to every single session of every conference. And I'd sit in the front row with my notebook. And this last trip, I decided that I was just going to go with the flow. And I remember one of the sessions I missed and went and had a nap in a hammock. And it felt so good. And it also felt a little bit naughty.
And
I think, we feel that way sometimes as entrepreneurs, because, I think when I was in a job, I never thought about my job at home. I just didn't like the kind of careers that I had. But yet there's always more you could do if you're a creative or if you're an entrepreneur. There's always more chapters you could write. There's always another painting you could paint. There's always another client you could contact. And there's always more emails. So it's hard to switch off sometimes.
Yeah, it absolutely is hard to switch off sometimes. And it's, it's really good self-knowledge and really good self-awareness to know that while you are in a place that is absolutely beautiful, where there's so much to do, but yet there's all these offerings of workshops and keynotes, and, to really note when the FOMO comes and when it's really feels like the path of least resistance, which we can talk more about soon.
Yeah, it was total FOMO for me, but I'm just learning in so many ways at the moment. I don't have to answer every comment. I don't have to fight every fight on Twitter. That's my hardest thing at the moment. And it's okay for not everyone to like me all the time. It's hard sometimes, but it's okay.
And I think that's a really hard one for women, that people not liking you. I mean, I know for me, that's a really hard one, whether it be in business or personal life, that feeling of that they don't like me. And even though my head can, have the wisdom, or not really wisdom if it's just in my head, but, the intelligence of going, all right, but it's okay, because not everybody does like everybody, and not everybody connects with everybody. And that's okay. You can still continue doing whatever you're doing in the way that you're doing it. And it's all good to know all those things, but to actually feel them and be able to continue to hold your power and not give it away in those circumstances, and not be affected and not be sensitive, it's really hard.
Yeah, it's a practice.
Absolute practice. And also acknowledging that as women, at different times in our cycles, we're more and less sensitive. So, it affects us sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, that's totally true. I've been tracking that. Actually, it was interesting that you say that, because of Stasha, who was doing a workshop at the conference we're at about your cycle. And, it's such an interesting reflection to honor that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of this, I suppose, Chillpreneur way of doing things is probably looking at really knowing yourself, and that includes your cycle. I mean, women do business differently. So, yeah, I think there's so much that we can talk about in this conversation to do with all that, and it's really exciting. But before I do, I want to give people a little bit of background about you, a little bit of like the bio, I suppose, just so that people who might not have come across your work that are listening, I'm sure most of them have, but if they haven't, then they can have a little bit more knowledge about you. So Denise is an author, business mentor, and self-made millionaire with a thriving global community of female entrepreneurs. She's a money mentor for the new wave of entrepreneurs who want to make money and change the world. She helps women charge premium prices, release the fear of money, and create first-class lives. So her course, the Money Bootcamp, has helped over 6,000 students release their money blocks. And over the last decade, we are seeing, I'll just repeat that. She's helped over 6,000 students release their money blocks. Now, that's a lot of people. And I think that, that's globally. So, and that's only going up and up and up. So obviously a lot of women are feeling like something like money blocks is something that's holding people back. So over the last decade, we're really seeing that women internationally are banding together to assert greater control over their professional success. And it's clear that women aren't finding like the opportunities of traditional corporate paths, that they're just not meeting their needs. And so they're creating their own paths, which they go into feeling that they will create more flexible ways, which we can talk about and doesn't always happen, like you said before, about answering emails and bringing things home. But, go into it wanting more flexible ways to be able to use their skills and create more fulfillment in their lives. But despite the progress and more women becoming entrepreneurs, I still feel like we're facing unique challenges that many male entrepreneurs simply don't face. And I want to talk to you about some of these.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to be an entrepreneur from a very young age, but when I go to conferences and meet other entrepreneurs, it's all different. Some people were forced into entrepreneurship because of maternity leave, not being accepted back into their companies, being on the mummy track, or finding that traditional kind of corporate culture was really bad for them physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things. And so they were looking for something else. And so however any of us came to entrepreneurship is great, because I believe it is just such an amazing vehicle for freedom, for abundance, for flexibility, for all of those things. Now, what I see with a lot of men is that one, that I don't believe they have as many money blocks as women do, because I feel like it's a little bit more, and again, please, I am generalizing for sure, but I see it's a little bit more black and white. It's like, oh, I have this thing. Someone wants to buy the thing, so I will tell them the price. They will give me the money, and we will exchange money for the thing, and then we'll go away. And it's like, it's just not there's no angst around it. And then I see some of my colleagues and peers and students who are like, oh my God, it's Mercury retrograde. Am I allowed to sell the thing? And like, how much should I charge for the thing? Like, am I being too mean? Am I being a bitch? Are they going to hate me? Yeah. What if they don't like the thing? And we want to be everything to everyone. We want to serve every target market at every stage of their journey. We second guess it. Some entrepreneurs I've met, they've never even sold their thing because they're too scared to put a price on it. So they're giving it away for free. They're getting beta testers. They're like, oh, well, let's just barter our things and that will be fine. And so there's just a lot more emotion attached, I think, for a lot of women. And we psych ourselves out. And I do it as well. Every time I think I've nailed it in one area, I totally have felt fine for years about charging for my courses. That's why I've had 6,000 students. But then I felt really bad about charging for speaking engagements. And so I had to start again from that and really be okay with charging for that. And then I had to be okay with charging for retreats. And then this is an interesting thing too. I was like, oh, I've nailed it in my business. This is great. And then now I've got a second business. I've got a rose farm. And you'd think that the numbers just go up and up and you're okay with ever increasing numbers, but it's not, because you find a new facet, a new nuance, a new layer to your money blocks. And so I feel bad about charging someone like $100 to come and like rent out the property for a meeting. And so I've had to deal with that and go, oh my God, it's a new layer to my same money blocks. And so it's totally normal to have them. Everybody has them, except for like sociopaths who have no problem at all, ripping people off. But I think most of us have some sort of one area of our life where we might struggle to charge or struggle to talk about money. Even if we've got a quite healthy relationship with money, there'll always be something that we think, oh no, I can't charge for that. And I keep on finding new ones all the time for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is years and years of whether it be conditioning or just way of being. I mean, females generally got together and supported each other and supported the family and supported friends. And, that was a role that wasn't a paid role. And so to the fact that most entrepreneurial women are moving into service-based industries, I mean, it might be different when you've got a physical product, because we've known that when you buy a product, you pay for it. There's costs involved. So when you're exchanging time as a service, women have always given their time for free. So,
absolutely,
to change that mindset about, women have done this for centuries and centuries, and in some ways it's been beautiful and created community and connection and worked really well. And yet we're moving away from that model and wanting people to charge for everything that they do and services, and yet we're getting more disconnection and less community. So it's like, I think it's somewhere finding that balance in between, because if women go too far into that model of creating everything that we create and all of our time is exchanged for money, then we also lose probably some of that just beautiful community spirit and being of service.
This is why it's really important to charge well for what you do, because if you are burning yourself out trying to help everyone for free, then you have no extra to give yourself. But also, like something like writing a book, right? Writing a book, it takes a lot of time and energy. But now I know that if someone comes into my world and they can't afford to buy my boot camp, they can buy my book for, $10. That took me a lot of time and energy and resources to create that book. So I see some people, they think that they're being really helpful by not charging anybody, but they're really limiting the impact that they can make. And when you charge well for what you do, you have energy to do pro bono work with boundaries around it. You have energy to create a free Facebook group. You have energy to do the other things, but I think you need both. You need to put on your oxygen mask on first. And for a lot of us, that is, I want to make sure my bills are taken care of. I want to make sure I can afford the things I need to, feel like I'm thriving. You know how much energy it takes when you have to buy the cheapest tomatoes and you have to like really watch the clock at the supermarket so you don't go over the free 3-hour threshold. Like that takes up so much energy managing those cents and those pennies. But when you have an abundance of that, you also have an abundance to give without going into martyrdom energy. So I do think it is a beautiful balance. And I think it's a giving and receiving, which is why one of my most favorite mantras to tell women is I serve, I deserve.
Yeah, I love it.
It has to be both. And I've met people who are so burnt out and so in their martyrdom energy and so resentful that they're actually not nice, generous people to be around, because they're giving it, but it's not coming from it's coming from a total lack mentality, and it's coming from a real desperate energy. There's no abundance to themselves either. And you can feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is, you're absolutely right. It is that fine balance, isn't it? And it is that feeling, like you said, of that freedom that when you feel you've got, and you don't have to have millions and billions of dollars, but if you've got what you feel you need for the life that you as an individual want to create, then it gives you that freedom of either giving and doing pro bono work, or just having that freedom to not enter into squabbles that aren't necessary between your kids or between your partner or between your friends, or, you know, you're being able to do the social activities that you want to do, and everybody in your friendship circle is going out for dinner, but you haven't felt like you've earned enough money to be able to join them. Then the ripple effect ends up that you don't gain the benefit of the social activity. So,
yeah.
You know,
it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of mental energy to stay in that space, to be in a poverty consciousness. It takes up so much. And I get it, because I've been there myself, where I've had to think about every cent that I spend, and it's exhausting. And the other side of that too is, and I love it, in my bio I talk about having a first class life, okay? Because
I like that.
I'm going to be really, really clear. First class means something different for everybody, okay?
Yes.
When we're flying, and I use this analogy because we all know, you know, when you're in economy class, you know, what premium economy, you know exactly what you get at each level, right? Business class and first class. Like, it's very clear that they clearly, like, deliberately make crappier toilet paper in the economy compared to the thing.
I didn't know that.
Well, they make it very clear, like, you know, everything's just a little bit nicer, a little few inches here and there. But in the real world, you and I would have a very different viewpoint of what a first class life is. So I am not interested in designer shoes and handbags. Like, it doesn't float my boat. There's nothing wrong with that. But there used to be just one idea of what a rich person would be like, right? And you could Google it and you could see it very clearly. If you didn't know anyone who was rich, your only view of that would be movies and TV, probably, or like what people said about the rich lady in town, whatever, right? And so you have to design your version of a first class life. And part of the reason why that's so difficult for so many women is because we don't have permission to dream that, but also some of us have no discernment muscles. And I didn't. I would go into a shop and I would look at the price tag first to see if I was allowed to like it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay. Instead of going, do I like this thing? What would I choose if money wasn't an object? So I didn't know how to choose, because I was always in that mindset of, you get what you get and you don't get upset. You're grateful for anything that comes to your life. And so if you were to ask someone, well, if you could choose, what kind of car would you have? What kind of sheets would you have? What kind of towels would you have? Because it's not about economy class costs this and first class costs this, because actually it sounds a bit complicated, but sometimes your upgrade is actually a downgrade to somebody else. It would be a simplification. It's not necessarily that you go, oh, well, then I have to gold plate it next. I'll need the gold plated version. So first class for me around, say, for example, underwear. I love using the underwear that has the built-in like panty liner stuff in it, and they're seamless, and I have like 20 pairs. They all look the same. So for me, that's first class, is the underwear that I can put on. I never have to worry about leaks or anything like that, and that's first class to me. First class underwear to someone else might be the Honey Birdette one, with all the bells and whistles and all the things, right? That for me would be so itchy and horrible. First class shoes for you might be shoes that cost $5,000, or it might be like a pair of Havaianas, and that's first class for you because what it represents for you and your lifestyle.
Really love
so
that.
Yeah, you can look at everything in your life and start to think, what would it be? And sometimes you make mistakes, and you go, oh, I thought that's what I wanted. I thought that's what a rich woman would like, but actually not my style, not my thing. And that's okay. And sometimes that's really ingrained in you from a young age. Like I remember, growing up in the 90s, Billabong was like the thing, and it was like having a Billabong bag and a Billabong jumper and all that stuff. And so still, even in my mind, sometimes I'm like, oh, I can't go to Billabong. So in my mind, it's still an expensive brand, even though it's really not that expensive. And so we've got all of these weird views about what a wealthy woman is allowed to be, do, have, wear, dress, spend her money on. And it's up to all of us to design it for ourselves. And that's going to take some practice, and it's going to take some unlearning, and it's going to take some looking at your money stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that because, everything I do is about self-knowledge and really getting to know yourself. And I think that it is about spending that time. There's no getting around the fact that you've got to spend the time debunking stuff for yourself. Like really,
Yes.
whether it be belief systems, whether it be conditioning, and it doesn't have to be done in a set block. Like now I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to debunk everything. It's about, I suppose, getting into that practice of self-awareness and like noticing your thoughts, and maybe not necessarily at that time doing a long trail off with those thoughts, but either, I often use the notes part on my phone because my phone's often with me. So if I've got this thought that comes, I might put it on the notes as a journal prompt for later or whatever. But, it's just, even if you're not going to write that down, but just noticing what keeps coming up for you and what is your mind tricking you to do. And, it's so interesting, isn't it, that everybody does have this unique version of thriving. And it isn't just this, and this is where I think when we relate it to business, the whole idea of these blueprints and formulas and all this stuff that just keeps coming on social media about, to make this amount, this is what you have to do. It drives me crazy because I just think how many women and maybe men, but how they're often targeted at women. How many, actually, there's probably more even coming through with just the whole entrepreneurial circuit, but how many target those vulnerable people who are in that position that can't afford this stuff. And they say, well, this is how I did it, so this is how you have to do it, but not taking into account the fact that they might want different things, got a different circumstance, got different mindset issues, all these other things. So I don't know, like the fact you do have boot camps and you've written books and you take people through courses, and how do you deal with taking large amounts of groups through things and staying away from that blueprint formula?
Totally. Yeah. Well, I believe exactly the same as you. Knowing yourself is the path to happiness. And so bootcamp is designed for people at different incomes and different mindsets and different money personalities, because we all have different money personalities, and there's actually 8 quite distinct money personalities that have their common sabotages, their common strengths and weaknesses. And so I did fall into that trap in my early days as an entrepreneur, where I did follow blueprints and I did buy people's courses and follow it exactly. And actually what changed for me is when I had kids. I went, oh, I can't do business like that anymore, because that mentor I was following has no idea what it's like to have kids. And she is telling me to go to all these networking events and go on like all these conferences, and I can't do that anymore. So does that mean I can't be successful? Yeah. And that's when I started doing a ton of personality tests, which I love. I love Strengths Finder. I love the money archetypes. I love Colby. I even looked at my horoscope and was like, what insights can I glean from being a Virgo in business? And I started to design my business in line with my personality, which is exactly what I encourage other people to do as well. Yeah. Because we are all different. And even those articles that's like, 5 things that all millionaires do. And it was like, they get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, no,
that's not going to happen for me.
No. And I really started thinking, maybe the path to being a millionaire is like doing the thing that feels the easiest to you. And I was like, I'm just going to explore that. And my block around that is like, well, that's lazy, and, that's not ambitious enough, and you have to hustle and you have to do all these things. And it felt like cheating just to go, but maybe I do this thing that feels really good, and like, maybe I just do that.
Yeah.
Is that okay? And I just followed that thread, and that's what I encourage other people to do as well. And actually, when you said too about the thoughts, one of the exercises that we get everyone in Money Bootcamp to do in the first week really is to write down a list of all your money memories. Like what do you remember being talked about with money? Like what bad situations, what good situations do you remember? And a lot of people can come up with at least 2 pages once they really sit down and look at the prompts. And then what are the commonalities in that? Because that's when you start to realize that a lot of families have unofficial mottos when it comes to money. And some of them are good and some of them are not so good.
Yeah.
An example of a not so good one would be like I didn't grow up with my dad, but when I started seeing him again when I was about 16, he used to say things like, you go to work, you pay your bills, then you die. And that was his unofficial motto in life. It was really weird. And so when you look at those commonalities, you look for the commonalities and look for the threads, you'll realize that your family does have a motto or a way of being around money, and you'll either feel like you have to be that or you're going to feel at odds with that. And that it can impact your career choice sometimes. If everyone's an accountant in your family, you might feel guilty about making money being an artist. If everyone is in academia, you might feel weird if you want to be like a spiritual teacher. It might not feel valid to you. My family motto was, it's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. And so I really equated niceness with like not asking for money and like not having boundaries with my clients. And so I had to really unpick that and realize what I'd made that mean as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is so many layers to just that little bit that you just said. And I think that not only going through with it just around money, it's just also that idea of whether your parents, no matter how much you felt seen and acknowledged and validated by them, and if you didn't, then you're continuously wanting to be, and therefore you might adopt more of their ways than, say, if they just had a particular conditioning that was their mindset, you heard it all the time, but you were very much encouraged to be your own person and very validated for your choices, then you may not adapt that culture thinking even if you lived in that environment.
Absolutely. And as you said, there are so many layers around. It's the family that you were born into, the lineage that you were born into. Absolutely. Some of us come from a history of entrepreneurs. Some of us come from a feast or famine cycle. Some of us come from generational poverty or generational dysfunction. And so you're born into that, and then you learn all the other stuff about money. And what's so fascinating now that I've worked with so many people is there's no real direct correlation to how much money you had as a kid and how many money blocks you have, because you might have grown up middle class, but everyone around you had more money. Yeah. And so it's all perspective. You might have grown up quite poor, but you didn't know you were poor because everyone was poor. So there was, no. And so that was me. I didn't even think about money because I lived in housing commission as a kid, and everyone has the same house when you live in housing commission. Yeah. Like it's literally the same house. And then it wasn't until I was 11 and my mum married someone who was quite wealthy, we moved to like a mansion, and then they would break up every 6 months to a year. And so we would go mansion, like we couldn't get back into housing commission. So we'd go like mansion, crappy little flat, mansion, crappy little flat. And so sometimes it's the contrast and the stories around the contrast that can give us some interesting views about money blocks. Because I think if I just stayed in housing commission, I probably would not have even thought about who has more.
Yeah. So just taking your situation personally, if you're happy to do that.
Yeah.
That's quite an, unique way of growing up. You've grown up with poverty, and then it's not unique to grow up with poverty and then possibly come to a place where either with your friends or your situation with your parents, seeing another side and way of things. How do you think that now you've got a passion to make a lot of money and to live with a lifestyle that comes with, and you've succeeded in doing that, and so what influence do you think that had on you? Because it could go in many different ways. Like, which part of the puzzle got you, do you think, to take that step?
I know exactly, because up until then, because I was raised by a single mum, so I didn't really have many stories about men and women so much.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until that experience that I realized, only years later, that I created a story that powerful men have all the money. They can take it away at any time. They control the power. Whoever has the money has the power. And so it took me years to unravel that. But what it did give me, a positive sense, is a real desire for independence and financial independence. And that drives my work, because I want that for other women, and it, women who are in bad situations for sure, but I want that for all women, for everybody really. And, my work now is definitely, we have majority of women in the group, but we have people who don't identify as women in my groups. And, minorities face even more financial challenges and disparity than white women, for example. And so that experience gave me such a drive for that. But there's always the flip side of it. It meant that I never delegated. I never created a team, because my desire for independence swung a little bit too far. And so the part that I love about my work is I love hearing people's stories, because
I love that.
we have all, yeah, of course, we've all got these experiences and stories, and we've created a story around that, an additional layer of story. We've created beliefs around that. And I find it really fun to unpick those. What did that situation teach you? How is it showing up in your business now? How can we undo that sabotage? How can we make it feel safe for you to create something different? Because the other flip side of that too is a lot of people feel like if they have financial success, they have to give up something. And so I had to unpick that. Then it was like, oh, I'll have that financial independence, but I'm not allowed to have a great relationship, because I have to have one or the other. I can have the money, but I can't be at my ideal weight. I can't be a good mom. And it was like, do this or do that. And I see that a lot in women. And I think everyone's got their own unique thing of what they feel like they have to give up.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to go further on this idea of a relationship, because you're in a successful, happy marriage with children, doing things together. And you just shared that one of the drivers for you was to be this strong, independent, or whether strong or not, but independent, financially independent woman who didn't rely on a man, so that the man couldn't control your life. How
100%.
does that work now, being in a relationship? And have you just flipped the model, so now that the man feels emasculated and feels controlled by you?
This is such a juicy topic of conversation. So yes, I do think we have a happy marriage, but we also do couples counseling, because working together is no joke. It is. We've worked together for 3 years. The first year was all about power struggles and arguing about really unsexy things, like how to do version control of Google Docs. It was so unsexy. Mark would send me an attachment and go, I need your thoughts. And I'm like, put it in a Google Doc so we can track the changes. And he would send me version 3.1. And I'm like, this is not how we do things in my company. And it's so unsexy to have that conversation with your spouse. So unsexy. So the first year was about power struggles. The second year was about differences in opinions on how the company was going to run. Third year was all about boundaries. So it's really, really good and bad. And we have had to deal with that energy around being the breadwinner. We're trying to come up with a new paradigm and show our kids that new paradigm too. Because the reason why Mark was so reluctant to quit his job and work with me in the first place is because he was thinking, what am I going to tell people that I do? What am I going to tell people? Yes. And I remember there's been a few times that I've been a dick about it too, because I've gone, this is my company, it's my face on it, and really just gone I'm the boss. Yeah. And there was one time too, because we've just built a new house and it's a lovely house. And someone was like, oh, what does your husband do? And I went, he works for me. And I kind of was a bit of a bitch about it because I felt like their implication was like, oh, you must have this amazing house because your husband's got a really good job. And I was like, no, he works for me, bitch. So there's an interesting dynamic. But what I love is that our kids think it's very normal for mums to have businesses. It's very normal for dads to have businesses. It's very normal. Their dad is the vice president of the P&C committee in their school and does reading groups and picks them up from school. And it's so normal for them to see us flexing in and out of being parents and being business people. Sometimes they probably see us talk a bit too much about business because it just happens, it's like 5 o'clock and it's like, oh, did you remember to turn that Facebook ad off because the promotions are finished? And the kids are like, they hear that. So I love that. And yet, there's new dynamics to work out around that, it's great. And it's new for a lot of, it's new.
Well, I think a lot of, it's the generational thing. And I think in each generation, there's a newness that comes that then the next generation take bits of and evolve with. It's like in our parents' generation of what we saw, there was a lot of this mindset that we've developed or that some people have been able to, work through and do great from, and some haven't been able to get past. But it's a mentality that's come from their generation. A lot of them are survivors. It's a very survival mentality. Buying a house was a must. It's a thing that you do. So saving for the mortgage and not spending money and making sure you got the money to pay the mortgage was paramount. That was priority. So priorities have shifted and changed. It was an easier job market. There weren't lack of jobs, so entrepreneurship didn't really probably hold the same weight as it might now, because people are forced into entrepreneurship as well as choosing it, because there aren't actually a lot of corporate jobs. Whereas in our parents' generation, they didn't have to make as many choices, so they just went along. In a way, they probably had a lot of ease and grace, even though they had a lot of struggle, because they didn't have as many choices. So they just accepted, right or wrong, but, outcome good or bad, but they kind of accepted that was the way. And then we are much more of a questioning generation where we, go, all right, well, this happened, but, I don't need to do it that way. So in our generation, we've got so much bloody conflict internally because it's confusing. We're kind of like that middle generation of,
we are. There's a really interesting book about this called Pendulum. Okay. And it's so fascinating. And it talks about going from a we generation to a me generation. And it just goes in the cycle. And we are actually the middle child generation between we and me. And even, it's really interesting. And even to get political for a second, if I can, what I found really interesting in the American political sphere is that Elizabeth Warren really appealed to our generation, dream big, fight hard. But the Bernie Sanders, not me, us, really appeals to the younger generation, because they're all about we and the collective. And we're still kind of in the middle between the me and the we. And so I just found that kind of really fascinating from that point of view. And also we're in this generation where we probably saw our mums be homemakers a lot. And so we feel like we have to have the corporate job and come home and cook the dinner and clean the house and do all the things. And there's a real leftover energy for us, whereas go like another generation down and they don't feel like they have to do all those things.
It's like you said in the beginning about what you saw when you grew up in the commission flats. You didn't know any different, whereas the generation like our children, they don't see any different. When I talk about gender issues with my children, they only know about them because there's news articles written on them, but they don't realize that. I mean, yes, when the facts are presented that there's a gender pay gap and the facts are presented about the domestic violence and all those things, but if you just take the domestic violence stuff out of it, but just look at the working and following your dreams and women having jobs and doing exactly the same as men, they think, what are you talking about?
What's the fuss?
I wouldn't, my daughter, granted, her first 3 years of secondary school were at a girls' school, which was very much had a priority of teaching women's empowerment. But, in her head, it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, why wouldn't I just?
Of course we can be presidents, and of course we can do all the things.
Yeah,
which is really great.
It's not even an issue. Whereas for us, we've seen both sides, and therefore we maybe, I don't know, but maybe we're making things into an issue that is creating more of an issue, and it might create some motivation and inspired action as well. But it also might create a mindset which didn't exist in some of these girls, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think one of the things we can do for our daughters as well as our sons, but mostly for our daughters, is to really talk about money, because it's been shown that even today girls get less pocket money than boys, that people tend to buy things for their girls, whereas give the money to their boys to buy from themselves. So we think it's fair, but it's really still not. So there's studies that happen that even now. So talk to your girls about money, allow them to, pay for things themselves, get them practicing negotiating, and just talking about money, and, do that work on yourself as well, to look at your unconscious bias around money and your self-worth. And, that's the only thing we can do. Some people sometimes think that I'm doing lectures for my kids about money, and I don't, but I'm really mindful how I talk about money. I don't say things like, I don't have any money, or we can't afford it. Like if they don't get everything they want, because I'm really mindful about that too, especially how I grew up. I'm like, well, my kids aren't going to be spoiled rich kids, which is an interesting mentality in itself. But if they say, oh, I want it, let's go in the jumping castle. Instead of saying, I don't have any money, I'll say, I don't have any coins on me today. So I really strive for neutrality when it comes to money, rather than, how dare you ask? It's like, oh, well, I've got $6 today. You can do one or the other, not both. And so I'm kind of teaching them to choose, but I'm not shaming them for wanting.
Yeah.
I'll just be like, oh, we're not buying anything today, or put that on your birthday list, which is what my friend Marissa Roberts, she teaches a lot in her course for mums. But not shaming them, not saying, what do you think I'm made of money? Or, you're greedy for asking.
I've got to admit, I've definitely been guilty of that at times.
We all have.
I think I'm triggered when I feel like they're being entitled brats who think that they actually, when there's no gratitude involved, and that they're entitled to do that, then I get triggered, and I probably am guilty of saying it probably not in the best way. But it's really interesting that something you were saying there that made me spark this is that a couple of years ago, I probably am a person that's quite low risk when it comes to just spending money. Like, it's not that I'm not. I feel that I'm a generous person, but I don't feel like I'm I'm quite sensible with money. As in, I never really have this fear that I'm not going to have it, because I'm quite sensible. Like, I can save and quite easily, but still live quite a good life. So, it's interesting. So,
easy come, easy go, it sounds like a bit. It's
but at the same time,
it's always going to be there. And
put it a little bit. Like, I probably, sometimes don't spend, or be a little bit tight with it sometimes when I don't need to be. And there was a big shift that happened for me when it was a mind shift set, that I realized that if I bought things, I had a belief that it meant that I was spoilt. And I didn't want to be seen as a spoilt girl or a spoilt woman, because I saw myself as this down to earth, really, not caught up in the consumer world, not pretentious, deep, all these things. So I see myself as that. So I didn't want to see myself as someone who just goes and spends money, because then I'm just this spoiled, entitled brat. But when I actually realized that there was a difference between being spoiled and being privileged, it changed everything. because then I didn't feel guilty anymore about buying things that I wanted or going out to nice restaurants or going on a holiday. I just saw it as being privileged.
Yeah, I love that.
Came from creating it myself, as well as being, from a family, a really supportive family. And so I just, for whatever reasons my privilege comes, I just felt privileged, and with privilege comes gratitude. And so therefore in my head it meant that didn't mean spoiled anymore. That means actually appreciative and grateful, and that's the sort of person I want to be. Whereas when I associated the other way, it wasn't the sort of person I wanted to be, so therefore I didn't take the action that was probably going to bring me a better life.
Yes, I love that so much, and I really resonate with the down to earth one. That's a recurring one for me. And I've noticed there's another nuance to that, which is about being soft. Yes. And about not being resilient if I'm too comfortable. Mm-hmm. And especially moving to this new house, because we're putting some really luxurious finishes like heated towel racks and heated flooring in the bathroom. And actually, when you look at it, it's not that expensive to get those things, but they sound really luxurious. And I remember thinking, oh no, my kids, don't want my kids to use this, because then they won't be able to exist out in the real world when they have to, it's good for them to have cold feet when they get out of the shower, because otherwise they're going to be useless as adults.
Yeah, they're going to be resilient.
Yes. And so I realized, I was like, oh, I've got this thing about just being a hard worker, being resilient, being hard scrabble. And it's part of my identity. And even telling people that I grew up in housing commission is part of my egoic identity of look at me, I'm, such a self-made person. And it's hard to give up that identity sometimes. And I saw it was coming up for me when I had kids, and I was like, I can't hire a nanny. Only rich, fancy people have nannies. Struggling with being able to juggle my work and things like that. So we've all got this identity that we have to kind of shed a little bit and give ourselves permission to be whatever kind of wealthy woman we want to be, and actually to redesign that for Absolutely. All of us.
And you have redesigned that, because you are the queen of delegation.
I am in some parts of my life, and then I struggle in other parts. So
in household stuff, I've read
in household stuff. Oh my God, yes. I don't do anything around the house, and I love it. And it's interesting seeing other women sometimes, my mother-in-law, she sees that and she's like, because she thinks I should be doing all the things, because that's part of the identity for a lot of women of that generation, because they weren't able to have businesses and they weren't able to even have careers. And so, there's so much identity tied up for women in, helping and being selfless, and that feels like then we can't make money. So you can tell there's a lot of layers, right? And so I really recommend everyone to go read my books about money, because it will give you some, really specific things that you can do from that. But as we said 20 minutes ago, probably awareness is 80% of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, even that
always.
Even that idea of, getting help around the house. I mean, that's a real female thing. That's the difference between a male entrepreneur and a female entrepreneur. They don't even really, if a male entrepreneur, even if he didn't have a wife or a partner and lived on his own, he would still outsource that household stuff without guilt. And it wouldn't even be questioned by his mother or his, friends' mothers. It's they'd probably be bringing him over the meals made.
They would, absolutely. And so let me ask, as a good wrap up, actually, as a favor, is when you see women speaking at conferences, don't ask who's looking after their kids, because I get asked it so many times. Yeah. They're like, oh, your kid's with you. And I'm like, no, this is my job. This is my work. And no one ever asks male speakers what they're doing with their kids. Sometimes people ask me on podcast interviews too, and I'm always like, I don't know, they're probably around somewhere. But let's support each other in creating whatever version of wealth we want to create. And there's no right or wrong. You can do it however you want.
Absolutely. And, and the ripple effect of that is that we create a state of well-being within ourselves. We lose that, you take that path of least resistance, and you lose that sort of hustle mentality, because you've been ingrained with it that you have to, work hard in order to to receive. And, you know, if we lose that state of hustle, then the ripple effect of that is that your health is better and that you become more compassionate and you're more present with your family because you're less attached to that outcome of that hustle outcome. And so, and you get, you know, that less burnout, less overwhelm, all of those things that then create the life that you actually really want. And like I said in the beginning, that life of joy and joyful productivity and ease and grace and feminineness around what we're doing.
Yes.
And, you know, like you said, that I suppose, you know, really, really knowing and liking and trusting ourselves.
Liking yourself, I think, is the key to everything. And that is the thing that I teach my kids, is to love and accept themselves, because everything comes from that, you know, it really does. So yeah, thanks for having me, Lisa. What a great chat we've had today.
I know, so good. I mean, we could go on for hours, but I know that you've got another interview to do. And
I do. It'll be my third one of the day, which I love batching them all up on a Wednesday.
Yeah, there's joyful productivity for you.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you, to have this chat with you. It was so wonderful to meet you in Fiji, and
it was so great.
Your combi van, because you know that I want to ride in that, or that I actually
ride
in that. Totally I want that. I want that combi van.
Well, I put pictures. If people want to see pictures, I'm on Instagram at Denise DT, and I love it when people screenshot the podcast thing and tag Lisa and I. Tell us your aha from this, because I love hearing people's money stories. I love hearing people's childhood money stuff, and it I love it.
Yeah,
it excites me.
Well, thanks, Denise, for sharing, you know, all your incredible insights today. And, you know, I love what you're doing, and you're really helping women become more autonomous and really independent, as well as really
Lisa,
enhancing their lives and, you know, their ability to thrive in the world. So thanks so much. And thank you. And thank you, everyone who listened today. As Denise said, we'd love to hear from you. Like, what's your biggest takeaway from today's conversation? Leave a comment, let us know, tag us on the socials. And if you would like more information on Denise's business and her books, where can they find you? And
all my books are on Amazon. They're in Audible, Kindle, paperback, and I'm at Denise DT, like on socials, and my website's Denise DT as well. So denisedt.com. I'll see you guys there.
Yeah. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. Consider subscribing to the Wealthy Living podcast on iTunes and on the Wealthy Living YouTube channel, so that you can listen to more conversations with wonderful humans whose stories, knowledge, actionable ideas, and wisdom can help you live a meaningful, connected, and well life, both personally and professionally. I'm Lisa, an integrated life, clarity, and wellbeing coach, a conversation facilitator, an event creator and host, and a workplace wellbeing consultant. To find out more about my services, you can visit my website at wealthyliving.com.au or connect with me on my socials. Until next time, remember, connection is medicine.